Hello, everyone. Welcome to our final webinar of 2023. We're wrapping up this webinar season with an exciting collaboration between ProtoPie and the global tech leader, Meta. During today's session, we will explore how Meta uses ProtoPie to stay at the forefront of UX prototyping in the dynamic world of robotics. My name is Julia, and I'm a customer success manager here at ProtoPie. I'm excited to be your host for today's session. Joining me is our esteemed colleague, Rebecca Carretas, also a customer success manager at ProtoPie. Rebecca, would you like to say a quick hello?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I hope you guys are excited to listen to this presentation.
I also hope everyone is excited. Thank you, Rebecca. We are thrilled to have a special guest speaker with us today, Ryan Olson. Ryan is a product design engineer on Meta's infrastructure data center robotics team. Ryan, please say hello to our audience.
Hey everyone, how you doing? Glad to be here.
Awesome. Now, let's quickly go over today's agenda. One second. So comments are open, everyone. You should be able to send your comments here. Okay, now it's done. Okay, thank you so much for that. Rebecca will start today's session with a presentation on ProtoPie, highlighting the powerful features that make it an essential tool for high-fidelity prototyping. Stay tuned as she unveils some of our most exciting upcoming releases. After that, Ryan will explore how Meta stays ahead in UX prototyping in the dynamic world of robotics. Okay, without following Ryan's presentation, we also have a Q&A session. We highly encourage your active participation. So feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A chat window here on Zoom, and we will address them towards the end of our session. Okay, let me just check the chat to see if there are any comments. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening. Yeah, please head over to the comments, to the chat and let us know from where you're joining. Yeah, we're excited to hear from where you're joining us today. Okay, then. Without further delay, I think we can start the presentations. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Julia. Okay, as Julia mentioned, today I'm gonna be talking about what ProtoPie is. I'm gonna also share what makes it unique. And I'm gonna show you some of its functionalities, and as well, I'm gonna maybe show you a little bit of what's coming on our next release. So let's start. So what is ProtoPie? Sorry. Okay, its name actually, it comes from prototyping as easy as pie, and it has to do a lot with the philosophy why it was created. So when ProtoPie was created, the intention was to lower this barrier that comes when creating new user technology, right? New user interface technology, and actually allow designers or empower them to express their ideas without, too much barriers, as I explained. So yes, that is what ProtoPie is. And when it comes to prototyping, there is a trade-off relationship between expressiveness and easiness of use, right? So what many tools struggle is like they try to offer us, amazing features, but there is a big learning curve. And in ProtoPie, we try to actually decrease this, and we are trying to create always like new features that make the results really powerful, and at the same time it's easy to use. So we don't want to sacrifice, right, the expressiveness of your prototypes, but we also want to make this tool easy to use for most designers. And that's why we actually got rid of code. So you do not need code to create prototypes in ProtoPie. And following this same logic, we actually came up with a very intuitive conceptual model in ProtoPie. So it basically covers these three things: object, trigger, and responses. So it starts very simple, right? You select an object, you assign a trigger to it, and also assign a response. As you can see in this example, right? You assign a tap trigger to this to the circle, and then it will change colors. So it starts like this, but then you can actually end up crafting a final product like prototypes, as you can see on the right hand, which can include cross-device prototypes and also hardware integrated prototypes. So I'm going to. So let me talk to you a bit about the ProtoPie ecosystem, because it is as a whole an ecosystem. It consists first of ProtoPie Studio, where you can start importing your designs from your other design tools, right? Your favorite ones. We have plugins for Figma, we have plugins for Sketch and Adobe XD. So with these plugins, right, you bring all your designs into ProtoPie Studio, and here is where you start assigning triggers and responses, as I explained, to all your design and assets, and start crafting really amazing interactions here. After you have finished creating your prototypes, what you can do is test them in the player, which is a companion app. You can download this on Android and iOS, and you can test your prototypes on real devices, mobile devices. And you can actually use the native sensors and native features of your devices, such as keyboard, right? And also camera, and so on. And this, of course, can be done in real time. And then after that, we also have the cloud, ProtoPie Cloud. Here is a space that we created to allow teams to collaborate. And also you can store your prototypes here, and you can also share different kind of projects among your teams. And it's also very easy to share your prototypes in a very safe way. And at the same time, we have this handoff feature. I know some of you know about it, but if you don't, it is really a way for you to communicate, all the interactions that you have created in your prototypes in a very easy way to your developers, so they can understand what you're actually trying to achieve, right, with your prototypes. So it doesn't stop there, because we also have ProtoPie Connect, which is another extension app, which allows basically prototyping across multiple devices, and also hardware integration. So as you can see on these examples, these are real world scenarios, right? You can control your oven or your washing machine using an app on your phone, or you can control the delivery of a parcel, right, using your smartwatch. So all these cases can be achieved with ProtoPie. So there is no stop, for whatever idea you have on mind, you can actually develop it with ProtoPie. So, and I think, maybe it's time for us to stop with too much theory, and maybe we can try something fun. I want you guys to open your phone, and I don't know if you have downloaded the app already, but if you have not, you can scan these QR codes to get the ProtoPie player on your phone. Let me know maybe if you are ready, if you have downloaded this. So we can continue. Okay, great. Some people, might already have it, right? If you have already been testing out with ProtoPie, this is the second, most important thing to do, have it on your phone. Okay, so now let's go to the next slide. Sorry. And you can scan QR code and start testing the prototype on the left. So if you open and you say, "Hello, Avery.
How can I help?
Can you tell me the weather for today?"
It's currently 5 degrees and overcast.
Thank you so much.
Today we'll hit a high of 7 degrees and a low of 1 degree.
Being very
You can
specific.
be more specific. What time are you going out?
Okay, perfect. You see, this is one of our main features, right? Voice prototyping. You can speak to the app and to the prototype, and also the prototype can reply back. Now let's test the other one, which includes tilt. So you can control the rocket movement by tilting your phone from one side to the other, and you can start shooting just double clicking on your screen. Are you guys trying this out? So yeah, it works really fine, and I can spend a lot of time here. But yes, this is one of the powerful, one of the many powerful things that ProtoPie can do. So yeah, get rid of this. So I hope you guys try this out, and we also have many available prototypes on the website. We have a gallery. So if you later on want to try more of them, we're going to be sharing probably the link later. So now let me talk a bit about what we have on our upcoming release. Next week, we will be having Studio 7.10 and also Cloud new releases. So this time we actually try to focus on improving, a lot of the features that we had. And especially as I mentioned before, you can bring your designs from other design tools, right? Such as Figma. So this time we focus on improving this importing experience. So now it is possible to actually import flattened layers directly from Figma. So right, you avoid all the hassle, then, having to import your layers, and if they don't work, you export them again and do all the re-importing. So with this, we help you save all the time, and also you can improve the performance of your prototypes. We also have a new shortcut that makes layers editable. So if you're working, of course, with so many layers, this will be very helpful. You just use Command E in case of iOS and in case of Apple. And yep, we're trying to help users make things simpler. So, and then this is a very highly requested feature, unique URLs for individual scenes. So now it is possible to share a specific scenes link with your stakeholders, or this is mainly useful for also user testing, right? When you want your participants to just focus on one specific part of your prototype, now you don't have to go through, right? You don't have to let them go through all the prototype. And actually, this is also part of the improvement that we have made on the Pi page navigation. So again, we give you this menu that has all the scenes available. So even though you share a unique link, your users will be able to also navigate through all the other scenes. We have added also more settings, and we have improved the name of this, we have improved also the names of the pies. So yep, as I said again, on this release, we're trying to always hear, the feedback of our users. So whenever, again, if you have some feedback about ProtoPie, we also have this community that, you can join, and also Julia will be sharing more about it. So yeah, again, thank you so much for listening to the presentation, and I'm gonna give the floor to Julia.
Thank you, Rebecca, for highlighting why ProtoPie is the go-to tool for high-fidelity prototyping. And also, thanks for all the sneak peeks into what's coming up. It's coming up next week, so you don't have to wait for long. Yeah, we're going to wrap up 2023 with some exciting updates coming up in ProtoPie. Okay, now let's turn our attention to Ryan Olson, who will guide us through how Meta utilizes ProtoPie for robotics UX prototyping. Ryan, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so is that showing up right?
Yep.
Okay, super. So we can get started. So my name is Ryan Olson. I am a product design engineer with the data center robotics team at Meta. So I lead product design for internal products and solutions that help us run those data centers that support the Meta family of apps, such as Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. So I'm kind of a design engineering hybrid with a software development background early on, And then I studied product design and shifted to a more design-focused role later in my career. I really love prototyping. I even do it with my kids. So there's my daughter and I doing some soldering, and my son down there with his metalworking forge. Okay, so as I said, I am with the Infrastructure Data Centers group at Meta. Meta is known as a hyperscaler, meaning we have huge data centers and hundreds of thousands and actually millions of servers. And my focus is on robotics and physical automation to support the people who run all that. So on the screen here is an overhead view of a typical Meta data center building. You're talking about 1 million square feet under the roof of a building. It's a 1/4 mile long lengthwise. You see it's in an H shape with the data halls on the sides there and an administrative and loading dock area in the middle. And there are multiple data halls along each side. There are 4 on each side, that each of which holds thousands of racks and tens or hundreds of thousands of servers. These buildings are measured in megawatts of capacity with, between 10 and 100 megawatts for a site being typical. So the question is, why do we need physical automation in data centers? Data centers are huge, and the people there are our most important asset. So automation gives those people the tools to do their job at the enormous scale that's required. And it frees them up from repetitive or dangerous tasks like inventory audits or moving heavy rack equipment. So these are a couple of the things that we've been working on. On the left there is a mobile autonomous platform that can navigate around a data hall without anyone driving it. Right now, it's mostly for remote visual inspection. Say we need to get, an actual image or picture of one of the racks or servers for diagnosis or auditing. It's able to scan equipment for asset management and compliance. And this robot works alongside technicians who are in the data hall. Some of its features are wireless charging, LiDAR for localization and navigation, machine vision cameras, and a telepresence system. And this is deployed globally in our data centers. On the right there is an autonomous rack-moving tug. So imagine a self-driving forklift that pulls short trains of very heavy racks behind it around the data center. For example, going from the loading dock to the data hall floor. So again, this is a self-guided vehicle that doesn't require a driver. And it saves thousands of miles of walking by people who would otherwise be manually rolling these racks around the facility. So what's different about the design challenges in our organization? My team is largely designing for internal users who receive training on the products that they'll be using. So we don't have some of the design drivers around consumer where you want someone to instantly understand what to do without necessarily reading instructions. We're usually not just prototyping one interaction, but an entire system start to finish. So from the user approaching the tool to being able to finish their goal using the system. And I personally focus a lot on hardware interoperability and simulating complex systems. So I am not as involved in things like what we might say call the pixels on the screen. I mostly work in wireframes and skeletons of systems to get everything working together. So, why is prototyping part of our process? It lets us iterate much more rapidly than waiting for our engineers to have to build each concept. It greatly increases the amount of user feedback that we can incorporate into a design. Stakeholders and potential users understand much more from an interactive prototype than from just static Figma screens. It lets us test the validity of potential use cases before we fully build them and make that investment. And prototyping the UI and hardware design at the same time lets them influence each other. I want to emphasize that last point. So by designing and prototyping the UI and hardware simultaneously, they can influence each other for a cohesive user experience. We often find ourselves specifying things like machine behaviors and signals and controls at the same time that we're fleshing out what's going to be shown on the touchscreen. And so we're able to bounce concepts and components back and forth between being on screen versus having a physical manifestation. So why do we use ProtoPie? It lets us do more than some other tools in terms of like programmability and maintaining state during a complex flow. It exposes programming concepts like variable scope, objects, conditionals, and events, while keeping those things accessible to non-programmers. And the hardware and backend interoperability is provided through the Arduino plugin, which is honestly really just a serial plugin. It doesn't have to be an Arduino at the other end. Custom plugins, and now we have the API plugin for JSON services, which is huge. So this was an early prototype of a machine that we were building. I had a Pi running on my laptop, which was connected to the Arduino that you see there over USB. The Arduino ran a script that knew how to control the stepper motors and the LEDs and the LCD display, etc. And it could read from sensors like the push button, all using what are known as the GPIO pins on the Arduino. So the Pi sends messages to the Arduino over ProtoPie Connect and receives messages back the same way. So this kind of assembly, incidentally, we call this a roadkill or an autopsy table because it's spread out on a bench instead of assembled into the actual enclosure. And that makes things like wiring way easier to access so that we can try different things and solve problems, things like that. So unfortunately, I'm not able to show work in progress that we've used ProtoPie for. So instead, I'd like to look at a fictional example that's very different from anything we do at Meta. And so enter the robot restaurant. So imagine a restaurant that's staffed entirely by robots, including the servers and the cooking staff. And I want to talk about some of the ways in which UX prototyping would be part of this development. So the next few slides will be fairly technical, but just keep in mind it's not necessary to understand everything. I just want to show the different ways in which we might use ProtoPie as a development tool for a few imagined scenarios. So for something like this, there would be a number of UIs involved. You'd have a customer UI. So that's for the person who's actually going to the restaurant. So maybe there's a tablet at the table where they can look at the menu, do their ordering, etc. There would probably be some kind of a management UI. So that would provide like a restaurant dashboard showing maybe an overhead view where all the robots are relative to the tables for use by like a manager or someone in operations. There would probably also be some kind of a remote control UI, and that would provide detailed control of individual robots. Like say you needed to take full control of a waiter robot or something like that with a remote control. And there's also the human robot interaction, or HRI. And that's kind of the physical behavior of the robots as they interact with users. And so we'll talk about each of these things and like how you might set up prototyping UIs for these. So the customer UI prototype, again, that's like the tablet that's at the table for ordering, is very simple. And it doesn't necessarily even need to be connected to anything else. You just have a prototype where you can browse the menu and put together an order and hit submit, and it maybe doesn't go anywhere. But you could also connect this to a backend to test as part of a larger system. So for example, maybe you actually send that order to the kitchen so that it can get made and brought to the table. So in that case, you'd have a tablet running the Pi with a separate Mac or PC running ProtoPie Connect, as well as some kind of a simple backend service. And by that, typically it's going to be something like a Python script that's providing JSON services. JSON being not the protocol, but kind of the language that the API plugin speaks for us. So the Pi would send an order to Connect using what are called send responses. And then Connect would send the order to the backend service using that API plugin. And so that would be a relatively simple system where a Pi is kind of representing a UI and sending data to and receiving feedback from something else. So a little more complicated than that might be a management UI. And again, this is, envision maybe a top-down view of the restaurant, and you can see the tables and robots and things. So, and maybe you would want to manually command a waiter robot to like go to a specific table or something like that. So this is likely to be run through a web interface on the same Mac or PC that's running ProtoPie Connect and the backend. So the Pi would send and receive from Connect, which then talks to the backend over that API plugin. And the backend can then talk to the individual robots through whatever protocol. The UI actually doesn't need to know about that. And, incidentally, for prototyping, we'd probably start by representing those robots as separate proxy scripts. So not an actual robot, but just a script sitting there that can receive robot commands and give back some kind of robot response. And then as the development continues, as the hardware is developed, those robots can be made into actual, mechanical prototypes that are sending and receiving those responses. And the UI doesn't necessarily even need to know about that. So that kind of compartmentalization is really important. The remote control UI prototype is kind of most like Tony's robot arm demo from a couple months ago. So this is where you're remotely controlling an individual robot in detail and in real time. So in this case, you need some kind of a layer between ProtoPie and the physical robot hardware. Arduino is one way to do this. So you can program the Arduino to know how to turn the servos and read from the sensors and things like that, again, through its GPIO pins. And then ProtoPie can send higher level instructions to the Arduino through ProtoPie Connect. And so you could have something like a gain controller for like fine gain motor control, controlling individual servos. Although when you do something like that, you then run the risk of the machinery like crashing into things or the user doing something that they shouldn't. So instead, the Arduino could include some kind of, I'm going to use the word conductor, so that ProtoPie isn't issuing low-level commands to the robot. This conductor is not a technical term. Just think of it as like a service that's running where you can give it higher level commands than like, move left 5 degrees. So for example, think of all the things that are involved in performing like a grab action by an arm. You would have to check whether the end effector, that's the part that has the fingers, already is holding something. You'd have to open them to maximum position, move to the target, close them, but not close them so much that it crushes the object. So you have to sense the object. There's a lot going on there. So it's much more practical for the UI simply to tell some kind of, again, this conductor to perform a grab. And then the conductor takes care of all the details and returns a result status. You don't generally want a situation where the UI is directly responsible for every single thing the robot does, because that logic is going to get out of hand really fast. Incidentally, a software engineer might call this conductor something called a state machine. So for the HRI prototype, again, HRI standing for human-robot interaction, this is how the robot autonomously interacts with human users through that combination of audio, video, and motion. And this is kind of where a robot's personality can manifest. Now, we don't make like lifelike robots, but even just something on wheels and with some lights can kind of have a personality. For example, say you're in a data hall and there is a robot there and it needs to move in the direction of a person. One way to do that would just be, okay, treat the person like any other obstacle and head full tilt towards the person and stop at the last second so it doesn't hit them, which could be a little jarring. You could think about alternate behavior where perhaps the robot acknowledges the person. Maybe there's a face or some lights or something that kind of let the person know that the robot sees them. Maybe it slows down, doesn't take a direct line towards them. Lots of things you can do there. So that would most likely be programmed into what I call the conductor. But there are some elements in a prototype like this that might be ProtoPie directly, such as sound, voice input, anything that's on a screen, for example, a face or something like that. So the example that I diagrammed here shows a prototype running on hardware that is probably further along in development. And that hardware is very often going to be running something called ROS, which stands for Robot Operating System. So ROS is a software layer that can manage all that stuff going on that the robot, as the robot's running, reading from its sensors, navigating, localization, deciding what actions to take, running its motors, etc. There's no way all that is happening on a Pi or even on an Arduino for a complex system. And you could imagine a simple system where the Pi talks to ROS directly through writing a custom plugin for ProtoPie Connect, but I'm actually not convinced that's the way to go in a case like this. I'd say that something like a REST API is more likely, and I know I'm starting to throw around a lot of technical terms, but a REST API is basically a service that inputs and outputs JSON to give Connect a way to talk to that ROS layer without the UI having to do that heavy lifting. So the Pi talks to the API talks to ROS, which includes a state machine, and the ROS controls the robot. So for example, ROS might tell Connect that a person has been detected near the robot. So the Pi picks that up. And maybe it draws a face on the screen looking towards the person or something like that. And it tells ROS to, say, reduce the maximum speed limit so that the robot slows down. So that probably all looks very complicated. But the main takeaway here is that the more complex the system gets, the more layers there are controlling different aspects. But in each of these cases, there's a clear place for the UI prototype as a Pi, as well as a well-defined conduit for that Pi to interact with the rest of the system without the UI getting too complicated itself. And so one of the benefits of that is that your prototype doesn't necessarily need to know about all the engineering details that are being developed as the system and machinery start to take shape, since it's just interacting with that conduit, not necessarily the stuff on the other side of it. And a final benefit is that when it comes to time to build the production UI, that production UI may very well use the same or similar conduit that the prototype was based on, which you spent all this time developing, i.e. that REST API that talks to the ROS layer. So that's it for the robot use cases. I wanted to close out just with a few prototype tips that we've kind of identified and collected over the time that we've been using ProtoPie. Prototype is a wireframe first to get that functionality working, all those connections with ProtoPie Connect and the API or whatever you have, and then do the visual design. Honestly, I usually myself don't get to doing the pixels. I have people supporting me who might work on that, but a lot of the really complex stuff in setting this up is all at the wireframe level. Use a roadkill to test early hardware interactions. You're going to go crazy if you're dealing with an actual robot that is in its enclosure and you're having to get it wires and stuff like that. A couple of things related to that screenshot there. Document your triggers and responses with meaningful names and use empty components for comments. So you see I put just an empty input field there, or focus response, I think. And I just named it something that is a comment for the code. It's not going to break anything. It's just there, and it lets you see your comment to remind you what you were doing. Use that group selection feature to group together and label related triggers. For those who have maybe a programming background, know that you can encapsulate code as like functions or procedures or subroutines just by using receive blocks that are called from within the same scene. It doesn't have to be called from somewhere else. So you can maybe have a bunch of lines that change the visual appearance of something. You can put that all in a receive block and name it something, and then call that from multiple places in the same scene. And it works like a subroutine. And then for repeated components, like say you have a horizontal menu that has like item 1, item 2, item 3, use an internal ID variable with a unique override for each instance so that you've got like instance 1, instance 2, instance 3, so that those instances can tell themselves apart. This is a little hard to explain in this amount of time, but I would recommend taking a look at Jeff's accordion menu tutorial. I was really blown away when I saw this technique and that this was possible in ProtoPie. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of how we use prototype as part of the robotics development process. And I would welcome any questions on that topic during the Q&A.
Thank you, Ryan, for a great demonstrations of how ProtoPie can be used for robotics prototyping. Okay, then I think it's time to start the Q&A session. So while Ryan was presenting, I did share some links that I thought you would find useful regarding some of the tutorials he mentioned. Jeff, can you share it with everyone? The tutorial, that would be great in the chat. So yeah, make sure to check out those links, ProtoPie Connect, to get familiar with the whole ecosystem. Yeah, I enjoyed the use cases. So ProtoPie can be used in robotics for a variety of industries. Okay, now let's head over to the Q&A window, and let's see. The way we will do this is that I will cherry pick questions from most voted. So the first question comes from Michelle E. Michelle is asking, are there any specific features in ProtoPie that the Meta team finds indispensable for their hardware software solutions in robotics?
That's a good question. It's mostly the architecture of ProtoPie that works well for us, just in terms of how the send and receive the responses and triggers work. I would say that even though this is a very new feature, that API plugin is gold, because we always have to talk to something on the other side, whether it's a backend service or, well, it's usually a backend service. And it is very easy to just, if you know some Python programming, you can use this thing called Flask to make a service that speaks JSON. And so having the ability to send and receive from a service like that, along with the parse JSON function, is, I think, it's early days now, but that is the start of what could really be, like a killer. It's already a killer feature. But I would put that as one thing. Also, let's see, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. The fact that you can put a Pi in the cloud and send people links to a web page that has the Pi running on it has been very useful to us, because I'm able to share an interactive prototype with people that way, rather than having to like manually walk them through it or do a screen recording, or, heaven forbid, show them static screens. So those two things have been very, very important to us.
Amazing. Yeah, I will share the user testing feature that inside ProtoPie Cloud that Ryan just mentioned. Okay, Michelle, I hope this covers it for you. Now let's see. The next question comes from, we don't have a name. Any interesting hiccups or challenges Meta faced when integrating ProtoPie with hardware in their robotics development journey? So please take us through the journey a little bit, Ryan.
The journey. Okay. So one hiccup was we were very excited to read from a camera because we had a machine that needed to take pictures of objects and read the barcodes off of them. And so I was all excited to use the camera feature, but it turned out that only worked with like your phone, basically. And so that was a little setback for us. But now they just introduced this media control where you can get an image from a URL. So if you can just send that camera feed to a URL in your API backend, you can now hit that URL with the Pi, and it can bring that short video or camera frame onto the screen, which again is huge for us. So I hit roadblocks like that every now and then, but ProtoPie has been really active in improving this functionality. So that's one example where they saw what well, I'm sure it wasn't in response to us, but they came up with a solution to a problem that we had. Other hiccups, I'm in my former life, I'm a programmer. So I actually like to be able to type code and stuff. And so sometimes it's a little hard for me to figure out, okay, I know how to do this in code. How do I do it in ProtoPie? It's usually fairly clear. But sometimes I get a little stuck on that. But the tutorials that are posted, as well as anytime someone posts a Pi that you can download, like looking inside of it is invaluable for figuring out like, oh, that's how they did that thing. Or, I wouldn't have thought of that approach. And so I spend a lot of time just downloading interesting Pis and taking them apart, seeing how they work inside.
Yeah. So it all goes back to the roadkill situation. Like we don't have the gallery, we have a lot of resources. So what we recommend always is, you download those, they're downloadables, and just inspect how they were built, how the interactions were made. So great tips there. Thank you so much, Ryan. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is a good one. For Meta, what's the secret sauce to achieving a cohesive and user-friendly robotics prototype using ProtoPie?
Secret sauce. Oh boy. I think the secret sauce is being able to try a lot of things quickly. Honestly, that's where the value is. So I don't have the secret to like what makes the perfect robotics UI or anything like that. But the fact that we can try things so fast, like literally, I was sitting in a machine with an Allen wrench in one hand and my computer on the other side. And I was like fidgeting with things in the machine and trying things in the prototype and seeing how they related to each other really rapidly, like much faster than we could have done that, I think, through engineering. And you try enough things and you get enough hunches and see what pans out, and you're left, if you try it, if you do enough iterations, you can be left with something pretty good. So, I don't have a magic formula, but just the fact that we can try things quickly without a lot of development. And things like being able to use Arduino, because Arduino is just so flexible in what you can do with those GPIO pins. Um, and again, the API plugin, I can offload a lot of stuff to Python if I need to, using the API plugin. Like, so if I can't figure out how to program something in ProtoPie, I can do it in Python. So I just like, honestly, it's like, a couple hundred lines of code using Flask to offload it. And so you can just try stuff quickly. And then, as I said in the presentation, as you go through that exercise, you start to define what that interface between the UI and the machine should be. And that comes in very valuable when it's time to engineer the real UI for production, because they'll basically have a definition of that conduit and what needs to be exposed to the UI.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right. So this takes me to another question. So Ryan, you briefly mentioned that you do have some coding background, right? So Daniel is asking, thank you for the presentation, Ryan. Have you always been in your current role or have you transitioned from another position? How long have you been using ProtoPie at Meta?
Interesting question. So before Meta, I was working for a modular architecture company, doing like green building, and I was working in SolidWorks a lot, as a product designer. And I encountered an opportunity with Meta where they were just starting up the robotics program at that time. And like literally they needed someone to do the wiring. I was kind of in a situation where I couldn't work full time. So, I came on and I made wiring harnesses for this robot that was in development. And then gradually, as the team got bigger and the products became more mature, I was able to demonstrate like, hey, there's this thing called a product designer. And that product designer could be really useful for what you're trying to do here. Because these were a lot of, it was all engineers. And design happens a certain way when it's just all engineers, and product design can introduce new ways of thinking about things. And so I kind of convinced them that they needed a product designer, and that, by the way, I am a product designer. Basically wrote my own job description at one point, and am now leading product design for the robotics group.
Wow.
And in
Amazing.
terms of how long we've been using ProtoPie, I'd say year and a half, maybe. ProtoPie is still kind of like new to me. Well, I'm not at this point, but I know ProtoPie was around for a while. And then there was a pilot at Meta where they rolled it out for, I mean, me in robotics, I'm off in some crazy corner in Meta. I mean, most of the designers there are doing design on like the Blue app and Instagram and things like that. And so they're definitely using ProtoPie for that. But I saw it and was like, oh, you can do these things with it. Let's give that a shot.
Right. So Muriel Luciano is saying, good for you. Congratulations. This is an amazing success story indeed. Yeah. So yeah, we hosted another webinar with Meta. I know that Ryan just mentioned about the app and the pilot that Meta has been conducting last year. We will share that link here in case you want to check out that recording as well.
Yeah,
okay.
I think my colleague John did a webinar like a year ago about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, about how designers use it. Indeed, indeed. Okay, let's see. I want to know more about how Meta bridges the gap between designers and developers in the robotics team. Any real life examples of successful collaboration?
Right. That design to engineering handover is super critical. And in my role, it's something that I pay a lot of attention to because I don't call myself a software engineer, but I sort of speak both languages. And so I can kind of straddle that relationship. So the way it used to work was we would do static screens in something like Figma and kind of annotate them, maybe do some simple static prototypes where there's just like one flow going through the thing. And kind of give that to the engineers and say, hey, build this, which leaves a lot of room for interpretation. I then added to that like written specs, like a Google Doc that has screenshots and describes behaviors and things like that. But boy, that's really tedious. Now that we are making prototypes that basically mimic the functionality of the app we want to build, I can just show them what I want. So, I can demonstrate the behavior that we're looking for, and like, what to do if this happens or what to do if that happens. And they can just use the prototype and see for themselves. Our developers, well, I'm speaking only for my team, but they don't tend to actually get into the pie and take it apart and see what's going on. But the handover tools in ProtoPie are very useful for communicating some of that to the developers. And also, it starts in Figma and then comes to ProtoPie. So I still have the Figma screens for like exact pixel positions and things like that. But lots of communication and open collaboration, like actually sitting down with the developers, is critical to that design handoff, because there's lots of ways that can go wrong if you aren't able to communicate your design intent. And so, the prototype is an invaluable tool in facilitating that. And I've gotten remarks from developers saying like, "Oh my God, you showed me what you meant, with that interaction or that behavior, what have you, and it makes it much easier for them to understand and then implement.
Okay, thank you. I hope this answers your question. Now let's see. Okay, this comes from Dawn Ju. Have you considered tools other than ProtoPie? What's the most important factor to choose ProtoPie over other products? That's a good question.
That is a good question. Other tools. I'm kind of, let's see. I haven't done a full survey of everything out there for sure. We kind of have like tools that Meta kind of uses as a standard and has these bulk licenses for, which was how I was introduced to ProtoPie. So, you know, it meets our needs in that sense. Previously there have been tools like, I remember we used to use Sketch at Meta, but now I've standardized more on Figma. But ProtoPie is actually fairly unique in my mind in terms of how we're able to leverage this tool. I'm sorry, I just don't have a lot of knowledge about competing products.
That's good. Yeah, so I shared the webinar recording that we hosted with John from Meta, and he is expanding a little bit there on how Meta did like research on the tools. So that one, if you check out that recording, you will get an answer to your question, basically on how Meta got started with ProtoPie. So make sure to check out that link that I shared. Okay, there were other questions about how Meta got started with ProtoPie. I'm gonna mark them as done because your answer kind of incorporates that. Right, let's see. This is a question from again from Luciano. Would you tell us a little bit about how ProtoPie allows metrics to be recorded to inform design?
Yeah. So you've got variables in ProtoPie. So if you're doing user testing, for example, you can just add a counter and say, okay, the user pressed that button this many times and that button this many times, or there was a preference for this path versus that path. So that's one way to introduce metrics. It's not too hard to do A/B testing with ProtoPie. I haven't personally done a lot of that with robotics. I'll just say, but it's pretty easy to do. I mean, you can copy a scene and change it, and then you've got your A and B, and just randomly send people to one or the other from the previous scene. Yeah, the addition of those variables, and then we have completely different ways of recording all kinds of data about what the machines and robots are doing, but that's mostly on the back end. So in terms of metrics about the UI, I love counters, and it's just so easy to add one. That's kind of a typical way that we would do that. Okay. We have a whole UXR team and discipline at Meta that I am not personally part of, but they've got very advanced ways of running quantitative analyses and things like that. But I have to admit, I don't get as into that myself. I'm more about making things work.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you, Ryan. So to expand a little bit on user testing, you mentioned A/B testing. So Elliot is asking, when it comes to user testing for robotics specifically, how does ProtoPie fit into the picture? If you can.
So we have, I often say when I'm talking about prototyping that I love cardboard and duct tape. So when we first have a concept for something, we'll do field tests like at the data center using what you might call the Wizard of Oz model, where we will mock it up and literally there's somebody behind the thing like making lights go on and off and putting things in slots and making the machine behave the way we want it to, and just we have people come up and interact with it, and see how the flow would go. And so as part of those Wizard of Oz hacks, we can put up Figma screens that would show like mock-ups of what the screen might look like at certain times. But now we can make a simple pie that could perhaps make a few more decisions or provide more paths through the flow fairly easily. So like literally there's an LCD taped into this foam core, and it's connected to my laptop behind the thing, and I can see what the user is pressing, or the decisions they're making, and pretty rapidly iterate on that while the users are still there. So that's kind of one example of how that works. And then you can get into more advanced things like using the UXR features of ProtoPie, which I myself am not as familiar with, in terms of sending the prototype to people and doing, I can't remember what the terminology is, but like kind of when you kind of watch them go through the flow and take metrics that way.
Moderator, yeah.
Moderate. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Okay, one other question from Darn. How do you balance the desire for advanced prototypes with the need for rapid iteration and testing across different platforms and devices?
Right. Well, rapid iteration, I mean, I've been talking about how ProtoPie lets us go pretty fast, just in kind of the way it's designed. And we fortunately are free from having to test across a lot of different platforms and devices, because most of the things I'm designing for are like a robot or a machine that has a touch screen. And so that hardware is completely controlled. And we're not worried about like, how is this on Android versus iOS or something. Now we do also have web applications, for example, like that robot manager, where you can maybe see where all your robots are in a facility or something like that, as a web-based application. So it has to run on different browsers and stuff. How do I balance the desire? I mean, honestly, it's kind of like ProtoPie lets us go faster. Yeah, okay, so I can fall down the rabbit hole of getting too detailed in my prototypes, like, oh, what about this edge case of this edge case and things like that. And at a certain point, you got to say like, okay, well, if that happens, then just put up a modal saying like, we know this just happened, we'll deal with it. So you gotta make it functional enough that a higher level decision maker can see a 30-second screen capture and understand. So you don't have to cover everything. But it's great if if my VP can sit down and click through an interface and be happy with it, win. And so I think that's kind of the standard that we use. Like, is this going to get the point across to someone who's a stakeholder?
Exactly. We all know how important time is for product development, and also for like selling to stakeholders. Like, these people they don't have time to, you just need to convince them through like you said, Ryan, a 30 seconds like demo. And
yeah, you get a very limited attention span, during which you can make your point. Exactly. And so you need to do that as effectively as possible.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think it's time to wrap up the Q&A session. Thank you for all the amazing tips. So this was all recorded, and we will share the recording after this webinar. Right, so let's slowly wrap up today's session with an announcement. Well, it's not really an announcement, but I want to remind everyone that they can join our online community, ProtoPioneers, to get help, to engage with other fellow designers, ProtoPie users, and, simply share your ideas and experiences. So make sure to check it out, community.protopie.io. Yeah, and thank you all for being part of our webinar today. We hope you found it both informative and engaging. A special thank you to Ryan for the insights into the dynamic world of robotics prototyping at Meta. Thank you, Rebecca, for the informative introduction to ProtoPie and the updates. And a big shout out to my ProtoPie team for helping make this webinar a success. I look forward to seeing you at our next event in 2024. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks a lot, everyone. This was fun. Appreciate it.
Okay. I will leave the webinar open for a few more minutes so that you can all retrieve your links that were shared. Okay. Okay, bye.